Excellent. Hi, I'm Badri from TalkBox. Thank you guys for having me here. So, what I want to talk about today, I was originally going to talk about building an MCU in the cloud, but I decided not to do that. I'm glad I did that because a whole bunch of people before me have spoken about it. But what I'd like to do today is really sort of talk about WebRTC and a whole bunch of interesting applications which are being built on top of WebRTC, right? Um, I was talking to Serge from Google last week, and he was describing this use case, and he was telling me about how the magic of WebRTC is really in the moments. It's all of these little scenarios, real-time communication on the web enables. So what I'd like to do today is basically, just talk about a whole slew of interesting applications which has been enabled by WebRTC, and give you guys a flavor of what is happening in the ecosystem out there. Fair warning, I just picked a random set of use cases, so please don't be offended if if your application or use case doesn't prominently show up. Um, Jumping along, what I wanted to do was, pick a full spectrum of very interesting use cases and say, okay, these are the sorts of interesting applications which are being built by WebRTC, and WebRTC is just the technology. And what makes it really interesting is all of these very rich experiences which are being built, right? And the first example I have here is this mobile application which is called Valspar. And what Valspar essentially does is, it's sort of a service application when you're painting your walls of your home or what have you, right? You can actually schedule a real-time appointment with a consultant, and then you can go and actually have that that wall or the area you're painting be viewed by the consultant who gives you real-time advice. Um, and and Chris and Sahi mentioned, all of the code is open source, so you can easily think about sort of compiling it into your own platform and doing like really interesting things with the application itself. In the case of a mobile device, you can easily think of intercepting the media stream from the camera or before it's being rendered on the screen, where you can overlay the right color combination. Let's say if you wanted to know what your walls look like when it's painted yellow, go for it. The remote consultant can actually do that. So this is sort of a very interesting use case which is being enabled by real-time communication on the web and WebRTC specifically. Jumping on, I'm going to be showing a whole slew of use cases, and so I love sort of developer sort of pet projects and hacks. Apologies for this slide; this doesn't show up properly over here. But what this is was this is a webcam-controlled HTML5 slide operator by Luigi, and what it is, it basically uses the get user media API, and you can use gestures to enable the slide transitions. So instead of using a clicker or instead of using something like that, you could essentially wave and actually make these transitions happen. Again, this is not very apparent. A lot of people think about WebRTC as being audio and video, but that's only one half of the equation. One half of the equation is to do what your phone already does on the web. But really, the other half of the equation is all of these very interesting use cases and applications, some of which we don't know as yet, which are going to be enabled by this technology by developers all over the map. So this is a very simple but very interesting use case, which is sort of built. Yesterday we had a whole bunch of fun, bobbing around at work trying to make these slide transitions. We thought we'll try and actually use this for my talk today, but I couldn't get my I was not that articulate in terms of gestures. I couldn't make that happen. Again, one of the big thing WebRTC enables, and we see this all the time, is redefining communication. All the time, we see communications as being sort of a siloed application. If I want to call somebody, I pick up my telephone. If I want to send a message to somebody, I use Google Chat or WhatsApp or what have you. But what WebRTC essentially has enabled is move communications out of a standalone concept in context. So I need to be able to communicate and use something around an existing context and not think of communications as a standalone experience. Time is a very interesting example of an application out there. Again, it's a mobile application. And what they have done is try and engage or create very immersive real-time communication experiences centered around content. Imagine a grandparent trying to talk to his or her grandchildren um, using a pure video conference. That's not very engaging to the children. So what they have done is they say, we can build all of these experiences centered around a content. This could be around a game. This could be around a book. Somebody who's traveling can actually read a bedtime story to their child, and the child picks up an iPad. And we see all of these very interesting sort of visceral experiences when people use these applications. So again, this is sort of a very interesting content-centered sort of use case. This is an example I wanted to talk about, again, just to emphasize the fact that WebRTC is not about pure audio and video. Although there are a whole bunch of interesting use cases, there are an equal, if not greater number of use cases where people are sort of using interesting features in WebRTC to accomplish interesting things. Here's an example of Pipe. Pipe is a service which enables people to share files. And if you were my Facebook friend and I was your Facebook friend, and then we would be able to share sort of content and very large files across from each other. This was essentially enabled by the data channels feature within WebRTC. So if you remember Chris's slide from the morning, WebRTC is more than just audio and video. It's about other forms of data. People have been working on very interesting projects with the data channel, especially creating sort of anonymized file transfer, or creating content delivery networks and using the peer-to-peer mechanism to sort of speed up content delivery networks. I see the guys from PeerCDN. So there's a lot of interesting applications out there which are not so much centered around audio and video, but are sort of radical in how WebRTC has sort of enabled them to happen. Moving on, again, this is sort of a very interesting, a developer-centric project. This is basically an AR drone. It's the Parrot. It's essentially a quadcopter, which has got a front-facing HD camera and a down-facing HD camera. And Rohit, the developer, basically built a very simple web-based interface to be able to control this quadcopter. Again, they reuse some elements of WebRTC to do that, and it's sort of a sort of fun exercise of all these things people playing around with. We essentially want to get a couple of these at work, and one of my pet projects has been to have quadcopter battles, but it's sort of pretty low priority on the list at this point. So again, a very interesting use case of all of the sorts of things WebRTC enables. Again, there's a whole host of interests which is happening in sort of vertical-centric use cases, right? Medical devices and medical technology is sort of an interesting area where there's a lot of things which have been enabled by WebRTC. This is an app by a company called Net Medical Express, and what they do is they make medical device trolleys, which you can wheel to a developing, is used in Brazil or any sort of developing country, and it essentially enables you to communicate with the doctor or the technician using audio and video. And an interesting extension to a use case such as this, you can easily imagine, is playing around with different sorts of input devices. We see interesting use cases where people are playing around with things like microscopes and intelligent stethoscopes and sort of sensors to actually pipe data using WebRTC data channels and build this very immersive experiences where you can alternate between audio, video, and also what the input device provides. For instance, if I'm talking to a doctor, you can potentially alternate between talking to the doctor as well as seeing an X-ray directly from an X-ray machine or something like that. So again, WebRTC has enabled a whole bunch of very interesting sort of applications which have sort of gained traction in this area. This is, again, a little fun. I'm alternating the sort of serious apps with the fun apps. The guitar tuner, there are a bunch of guitar tuners which were implemented in WebRTC, which is a whole bunch of fun. Yesterday, somebody at work was very curious as I was playing around with this app as to why Lauren and I were making high-pitched noises in the corner. We were actually trying this out to see if it works, and apparently Lauren can hold the tune better than I can. But again, this is sort of a very interesting application, completely sort of out of out of the box when you think about sort of what WebRTC has enabled. I might have. There we go. Um, Again, we truly believe that there's a lot of interesting opportunity in sort of the services industry as well as the Internet of Things, right? For those of you who know Fluke, they make multimeters and sort of electrical devices and systems like that, where they are sort of working on a thing which is called Fluke Connect, which essentially collaborates or puts in touch people um, uh, in sort of a services routine. And basically, the way it works is if I were a junior apprentice and I'm actually going and fixing an electrical issue or whatever, and I'm not really sure how to fix it, what it enables you to do is, it's a see what I see use case where I can point to the fried wiring circuit and call the expert engineer. He can actually see what's going on and sort of help debug that issue. And if you think about this very simple see what I see model, which WebRTC has enabled, um, it's essentially applicable to most services, whether it's plumbing, whether it's real estate assessments, whether it's color consultants for painting. Um, I think it's basically opened up a whole raft of interesting opportunities in the services industry. And an interesting extension to that again is you can think about sort of with the Internet of Things. You can actually think about all these other devices, sensors actually inputting data into this application while the real-time conversation is happening. So again, this is sort of a cool use case which is being enabled by WebRTC. And one of the points I want to make as we are walking through all of these is there's a lot of conversation which generally happens about, some of these are supported by the standards as it exists today. So a lot of things are not supported by the standards. But essentially, because of the fact that WebRTC is an open standard and protocol, and all of the source code is open, it actually opens up a whole host of options or opportunities for people to actually go beyond what merely the standard exists today. There is no reason why somebody cannot take the source code and sort of tweak it in very interesting ways, use a service provider, use an open source software stack, what have you. Again, there's a lot of online tutoring education sort of scenarios which WebRTC apps are being built. But I thought this would be another interesting application from that end. It's called Capisce, and what they want to do is be able to sort of crowdsource or connect live interpreters with people who want interpretation services, right? If I were in an important business meeting or what have you, and I wanted interpretation services, I can actually use this app and actually set up these calls and get access to a live pool of interpreters. Again, this is sort of a very simple yet interesting use case which WebRTC has opened up. This is one of my favorite examples. It's not just about service industries and things like that. This is called Wrapped FM, and what they do is they host live rap battles. I'm not kidding you. This exists, and it's quite amazing. You can actually go there. You can watch all these people sort of battle each other, and there's live voting and all of that. It's quite remarkable the sorts of creative applications which are being built centered around WebRTC. I wish. I wish. And sort of coming towards the end of my presentation, but here's a very interesting application. Again, it's sort of a see what I see use case, but the point I want to make here is it also extends to other areas where that scenario makes sense. In this case, Be My Eyes was actually based out of a nonprofit in Denmark. It was started by a visually impaired person, where oftentimes you have a lot of trouble, reading like nutrition labels and things like that, which are still not accessible to a majority of people. And what they are building, or they're using WebRTC to build, is to build this See What I See app, which puts visually impaired people in touch with a pool of volunteers. So if I had if I wanted to volunteer 3 hours of my time, I could essentially register, and a person on the other end could flip on their phone, request for my help, and then I can tell them or I can describe to them what exactly I'm seeing. Um, so if you look at it from that context, it's from a pure technology point of view, it's sort of a very simple app to build. But in terms of the social impact it can have, or sort of in terms of the good it can go, it's quite remarkable. All of these use cases, and again, all of these have been enabled by WebRTC. It's not that these were possible to do in the past, but were way harder. Today, a web developer can go look at the online tutorials or source code and quickly write a couple of lines of JavaScript and actually have a live video conference running. And so, and finally, I think the final example is a whole bunch of robotics companies are also embracing WebRTC, right? This is a company called Double Robotics. What they do is they build a telepresence robot. This is sort of a gyroscopically controlled robot. You stick an iPad into the head of the robot. It looks like it looks like short circuit V2, and you can remotely control this robot and drive it around from either a mobile app or from your browser, from Chrome or Firefox. And it's quite powerful to have this robot go around and sort of be part of like remote meetings and stuff like that, right? You can actually wheel yourself into a conference. The thing can slide up and down, so you can actually see what's on the screen. There's also a prism, which enables you to see what's underneath the robot, so that it doesn't trip and fall over wires or what have you. So it's again a very interesting use case, which has been enabled purely by the advent of WebRTC. So that's sort of the end of my presentation. But what I'd like to leave all of you with is hopefully a slice of all of the applications which are being built. And WebRTC essentially is a technology, and truly for the technology to be valuable, it depends upon everybody in this room and everybody beyond to build all these rich, immersive, fun experiences which actually touch people's lives in a very tangible manner. So I encourage all of you guys to actually use WebRTC, play around. It's very simple, and sort of come up with interesting applications. Thank you.